friends. Welcome to the Creative Impact Podcast. I'm your host, Rachel Caldwell, and I'm so happy you're here. Each episode, I take some time to chat with fellow artists about life, faith, and the impact of the arts.
Yeah, so I was always somebody who was really involved with the church and had never really been hurt by it. And so when all that kind of went down, it was, I had to really search my heart and ask myself, how strong is my faith? Is the church going to break my faith? And actually that's a song that I wrote kind of came out of that question, and I guess I would say to keep pressing in to who God is versus who the people who have hurt you are, who they have been to you.
I'm so thankful you're listening today. I hope that you're encouraged and refreshed by the conversations each week on this show. You can become a monthly supporter of the podcast by joining our Patreon community. As a supporter, you get access to extra content that's only available to patrons. The most recent bonus content you can gain access to is the video from my interview with Michael and Brianna Cash on episode 15. You can learn more at creativeimpactpodcast.com/Patreon. That's creativeimpactpodcast.com/Patreon. It was such a joy to get to meet Libby John, the host of the Art and Faith Conversations podcast. Libby and I happen to both be 9s on the Enneagram and share a similar passion to highlight artists of faith through our podcasts. Libby hopes to use her podcast to encourage artists in their search for deeper meaning in their creative identity. We talk about how common it is for artists to feel on the fringes of their faith community and why connecting into community is so important. In addition to creating and hosting the podcast, Libby is a dancer, teacher, and singer-songwriter. We chat about her early journey with music and dance, leading her to pursue dance in college. Libby relates her wisdom from over 15 years of teaching. She explains how movement has power to heal us and connect us deeper in our faith. Libby shares about a challenging season where she felt wounded by the church and how it prompted her to explore songwriting. I love the reminder that you'll hear later in the episode where she says, "Don't let your low point be your end point." Since 2017, Libby has released 2 albums of original music. Through her story, I personally was reminded of how art can bring order to chaos and bring healing for our souls. I hope you enjoy my conversation today with Libby John. Get to have a conversation today with Libby John, and I'm so excited to have you here. Thanks for joining me, Libby.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Yeah, of course. So it's super fun because actually I heard about you through Randall Flynn, and when I was interviewing him for the podcast, and he mentioned that you also had a podcast that has similar, heart behind it with, connecting artists that want to connect both their artistry and their faith and what that looks like. And so I got super excited and looked up the podcast. And I'm excited to hear more about that today in our conversation. So I'd love to hear a little bit more about you and just what you're up to right now.
Yeah, well, up to right now, it's definitely a weird season for everybody, and especially for those of us in the dance field and figuring out what that looks like when it almost feels like your whole vocation was canceled in a way.
Right. Yeah.
Because it's this living art form that you are usually present with other people, and so I've taken just the last few months to kind of contemplate what that really means and, what that looks like going forward. So I'm kind of just trying to enjoy summer right now and enjoy the downtime while I can. And,
that's good.
Kind of be ready for what's ahead.
Right. That's good.
Yeah, I'm definitely still publishing some episodes. Summer always looks different regardless of, what's going on in the world. So definitely still publishing episodes through the summer, but just not quite as, regular momentum like I usually have.
Right. That makes sense. Yeah. And you're a mom, right?
Yes. I have 3 daughters. Yeah. They're 15,
cool.
12, and 10. And so, definitely keeps me busy too. And normally my husband is a scientist in the research, development of new technology. He works for 3M. So we don't share similar vocations.
That's kind of nice though, in a way you can have some variety.
Yeah, he's very creative in the science and technical world. So I'm kind of the stay-at-home parent when he's normally traveling a lot. He's not right now. But yeah, so I balance all of the work that I do with being a stay-at-home mom too. So.
Gotcha. Yeah, maybe we can talk about that a little bit as we go into the conversation as well. But I just love getting to learn a little bit more about you. And so I know you're a dancer, but also singer, songwriter. So it sounds like you have a lot of artistic giftings. And where did all of that begin? You know, if you kind of think back to growing up, and what was the beginnings of that for you?
Good question. I always played piano growing up, but I felt like it was a thing my mom wanted me to do. I don't think I ever really connected the fact that I kind of was just more creatively, inclined.
I wish it felt a little more like a task, maybe.
Yeah, I wish I would have connected those dots a lot earlier, that's for sure. But then I always liked to sing along with some of my songs and started singing in church. And so I kind of always had that in my life, but I'd never connected that either. Took me a long time to connect everything. But I always enjoyed that. And then I kind of came in through dance, kind of through the back door, I feel like. We went to a church that was very charismatic and kind of progressive in the arts in the 90s. And they started doing just huge productions of the Passion Play and Christmas, and they wanted dancers. And so some dance ministry started there, and we had a youth choir that did a lot of, musicals and stuff. And I just started choreographing for it and just found that gift through that. And found that I really loved that. And I tell people I started dancing because I loved Janet Jackson music.
Love it.
And, so I wasn't this classically trained dancer growing up.
Right.
And so I kind of came to worship and to dance, through the church kind of at the same time, which is unusual for a lot of people. And it was a Lutheran church.
That's kind of cool though, Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that's pretty neat.
Yeah. And so it did make me, I feel like it made me become a very late bloomer though, that's for sure. Because then once I started college, I was like, well, this is what I know that I love to do, and so I just decided to try to take as many dance classes as possible. And I went to the University of Minnesota. It was a little bit of a hard time because my parents moved to Ohio right when I graduated from high school. And so Minnesota was my home, but they had left. I didn't have a home left there.
Yeah, but that would be a strange feeling for sure.
Yeah. But I was kind of stubborn. I definitely went through a stubborn phase and decided I'm staying in Minneapolis no matter what. But God redeemed that, thank goodness. But yeah, so started at the U of M and just took as much dance training as possible. And God just continued to lead me with different projects and different ways.
So cool. So what did it look like post-college? What were you up to and kind of your journey since then?
Well, I don't think I ever thought dance would be in my life that long. I'm in my 40s now and I'm still dancing and I can't believe it. And I think that's such a gift because so many good things have come into my life because of dance. And if you're in the dance world, you understand that, the relationships that are forged, in a dance studio are like none other.
Exactly. A lot of community for sure.
Yeah. And so I kind of just kept dancing. I started teaching. I got married and started having kids. And then full circle, the studio I teach at now is actually at the church I had grown up in and learned.
Oh, really? Wow. Yeah. That's super cool.
So a full dance academy had developed in that church in the time I was gone and away. And so I've just been a part of, continuing to develop new programs there and help co-direct a conservatory program there for upper level students. And then my colleague and I started kind of a pre-professional company, kind of birthed out of the studio. And so just some different projects continuing to grow there and just a lot of mentorship and discipleship of, teens, especially and young adults. It's a real passion of mine to, continue to sow into their hearts as well as do that technical training. So Yeah.
Right. And is that pretty much through the studio there? Or do you have other things you're doing as well for the mentorship?
Yeah. Yeah. Mostly through kind of some of those specialty programs, and because you can kind of take your time more and really,
Mm-hmm.
develop deeper relationships. But I also do side projects, and I've always done choreographed musicals for high schools, and I worked with YWAM and been a guest choreographer. At one point, the YWAM School of Dance Studies was up in Minnesota for 9 months.
Oh, okay. I didn't realize that.
Yeah, it
Yeah.
was very unusual, but the director at the time was a friend of mine, which you might know her too, but and she's from Minnesota, and so she brought the program up to Minnesota from Kona, Hawaii, which they all thought they were going to be in Kona.
Yeah.
And then they
Like,
ended up in Minnesota through an entire winter. That was pretty brutal. So,
yeah.
yeah, but ended up being a guest choreographer for their season. And so different side projects, as well, that God just kind of keeps in my life. And,
That's so cool.
it has been really cool. And it's connected me with people all over the world. So,
Yeah, for sure.
it's been
And
great.
do you happen to know Tammy and Andreas Tolas by any chance?
Yeah, so I met Tammy because I just went to Kona in March
Okay.
for spring
Awesome.
break before the world closed.
Right. Exactly. Yeah, you got
yeah,
out just
we
before probably, but
yeah, we had a vacation planned there, and so I connected with her and said I'd love to see the base, and I taught a guest taught a modern class
oh,
there,
cool.
and yeah, it was really good to finally see it. I didn't do YWAM myself, but I have tons of friends, and connections with YWAM. So
Yeah.
yeah,
So Tammy and Andreas were at Audeum, part of Audeum 2 with me when I was there. And so,
okay,
yeah, so I'm kind of hear what they're doing a little bit just through that. And I know obviously Randy
yeah,
had a
for
lot of
sure,
connections with YWAM and work with them a lot. So seems like really neat things
yeah.
happening in Kona and
Mm-hmm.
through their the ministry dance side of things there. So yeah, that's super
Yeah, for
exciting.
sure.
Nice. So I would
Yeah.
love to hear a little bit more about just your journey also as a singer songwriter. So you said you played piano growing up and you love to sing. And when did that really like
hmm
develop for you?
Well, I mean, yeah, I always kind of had my foot in music ministry at some level and playing piano and stuff, but I never thought of myself as a songwriter
Hmm.
or felt like I knew how to do that. But it actually came from a really low point
Hmm.
in music ministry. And I had just really poured a lot of hours and heart into the church we were at the time and the ministry there. And it was kind of they never really had a female worship leader before. And I was
Yeah.
kind of that guinea pig and just trying to, you know, create good things there. And just had a really difficult time and with leadership and something, I just knew God was releasing me from that. And I needed
Hmm.
to step away from that. And it was just such a low point for me because I had spent so many hours and I felt like all it gave me back was heartbreak,
Hmm.
And so I basically told God I'm done with music. And
Yeah.
he said, well, I'm not done with you in music.
Oh, wow. Nice. Yeah.
And, if God says something like that to you, it's like so compelling, even though, it was like in his love drawing me, back to himself. And I just heard him say, sit at your piano and just pray. And that's when I started writing songs. And these prayers
Cool.
just became songs. And it was like about a year of doing that where I just kind of, healed through that
Hmm.
time. And I had no intentions of recording them, or I didn't even know how to really pursue a recording project.
Yeah.
But yeah, after about a year, I felt like it's time to share these now. And that wasn't something I was, planning on doing. So it was definitely a
Right.
very vulnerable time. But I just felt
Hmm.
really compelled that, he was leading me to do that. And so, when God leads you to do something, everything doesn't just fall into your lap. You still have to do the legwork. And, he still
That's
grows
so
you
true.
and shapes you in learning how to do these things. It's like that
Uh-huh. Yeah.
collaboration with him. And so figured out, found a producer that I could afford and
Right. I know. I'm sure that's a journey all in itself to figure that out.
Yeah, definitely. It's and recording is really tedious work. I don't love recording because it's very vulnerable and you have to listen to every sound and every note, and they don't all sound good. um,
Right.
yeah, and so recorded my first EP and I released it for my 40th birthday, and I just felt like,
That's so cool.
yeah, it
Yeah.
was this, 40 is such a biblical number, and it felt like, this God's timing in that. And then I still had some more songs in me, which I was surprised. New songs started coming out right away, and kind of had that same compelling feeling of sharing them. And so a year later, I released a full length album of 10 songs, which kind of unheard of to release 2 albums in a year's time. So
Yeah.
definitely know, God's hand was in that.
For sure. Yeah.
Yeah, wasn't expecting that. And so, yeah, so I have that side of things, and I almost felt like kind of an intense season, because it came out of this prayer and healing from just church and ministry and, some of that tension
For
we all
sure. Yeah.
have experienced. So I haven't written anything new for a while, and it seems like that's kind of how my life has played out, like more intense dance seasons or more intense music seasons, and I just have to be patient with whatever season it happens to be.
Definitely. Yeah. So, and now I'm sure it's different as well, just in the midst of a pandemic and everything like that. So, have you still been teaching much, doing like online teaching and that kind of thing?
Yeah, a little bit through the spring. Our academy was, trying to keep up classes for a little while, and then we've taken May and June off.
Okay.
And some classes are starting back up July here, and then we've released a full fall schedule. And so I know some teaching will start back up again soon, but hard to know what that looks like too. And especially since our academy is inside a church, we have their regulations on top of,
that's true. Yeah.
protocols we would follow. And so it's a little dicey, but
makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah. I feel like actually today I was thinking about things and feel like I'm kind of in an incubating season where even with my podcast, I always like to be evolving. I don't just, pump out episodes for the sake of being busy,
Right.
I'm always really sensitive to just praying through each season I start. And so I'm really feeling like God's kind of bringing up some new ideas and thoughts on that. And I think I'm in kind of an incubating season, which is great timing to be in that.
For sure. Yeah.
We have this time to think about things and
exactly.
And pray.
Yeah. More time to be intentional about, I think, kind of getting quiet and seeking direction and that kind of thing, for sure. And kind of reconnecting into family and some of those roots as well. Yeah. So I'm curious to hear a little more about that season in the ministry. And I know that's a common thread for a lot of people's stories, is there's sometimes a lot of hurt within ministry or within the church, and I don't know if you have any word of encouragement for people that might be walking through that kind of a season where they feel hurt by the church or hurt by people in ministry, and any wisdom you'd have to share.
Yeah, so I was always somebody who was really involved in the church and had never really been hurt by it. And so when all that kind of went down, it was, I had to really search my heart and ask myself, how strong is my faith? Is the church going to break my faith, in this experience? And actually that's a song that I wrote kind of came out of that question, and I guess I would say to keep pressing in to who God is versus who the people who have hurt you, are, who they have been to you. And that's really hard. I mean, it took me a long time. And especially, I don't know if you're into the Enneagram, but
I am.
I'm an Enneagram 9. So I'm a 9.
That's so funny.
Are
I'm a
you?
9 as well. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's like that loyalty and, you get deeply connected and attached to things and people. And
and kind of the heart
Yeah.
of wanting to have peace with people, relationally.
Right.
And, it's so hard to have
Yeah.
conflict, and yeah, definitely
Yeah.
sense
Yeah.
that.
Yeah. So I think it just maybe even hurt me more than, some other types would be. But I still felt really convicted to make sure we went to church, even if it was a different church and even if it wouldn't be our long-term church.
Mm-hmm.
It just felt like, okay, can't totally disconnect because I still believe in the body of Christ, but
Mm-hmm.
I did feel like God gave me permission to start just asking more questions and even questioning the systems we're always just given, and
Mm-hmm.
to think bigger and think more innovatively. And I think that's just that creative side of me. And, how can things be better? And I think maybe that's where the podcast came from too, just being able to cultivate a space that was safe and nurturing and, for those people who feel on the fringes, which artists typically do. And so,
Right. That's true.
a lot of good things can come from a low point. And I actually was just writing that down today, that don't let a low point be your end point. God
Yeah, that's
usually
super good.
I think God makes our low points new beginnings. And so,
Mm-hmm.
to
Yeah.
just be patient through that process doesn't mean a low point just ends and yay, everything's great.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
But definitely a process.
For sure. And that's a good segue actually into talking about the podcast. And so sounds like it came out of that similar season. But what else, I guess, inspired the podcast for you?
Yeah, there's a couple years past that. And I think just always feeling the same way of wanting more resources, of hearing from other artists and artists of faith and what they experienced and challenges. And I think just that tension a lot of us always feel, where's my place in my faith and my art, and how do they
Mm-hmm.
intersect, and is it okay if they intersect? Is it not okay in some circles and settings?
Right. Yeah.
And I was having those conversations anyways with, some of my friends. And I was kind of in the blogging world, and some people were transitioning to podcasting. And I was like, maybe, that's a good place, a good platform to have these conversations and
Yeah.
create more resources and voices into this tension. And
Mm-hmm.
I just really felt, I think maybe that Enneagram 9 of me was, I felt that isolation and the pain of that isolation, that for other people and artists who feel on the fringes of their faith communities,
Mm-hmm.
who don't feel like they have a place there, and I wanted to create a space that, could nurture that.
Yeah. To kind of have a place to belong or feel that community. Yeah. I think
Mm-hmm.
that's super beautiful. I've gotten to listen to your podcast, some of the episodes. I'd love to listen to more, but it's definitely
Yeah.
evident that that's the heart behind it, and creating a safe place, like you said, and a community where people can feel understood, I guess, and connect in. And it's pretty cool with
Mm-hmm.
podcasting. I'm guessing you've sensed this too, with how it really does feel very intimate. Like, the people once you started
Yeah.
listening for a while, and it's a great
Yeah.
way to build that sort of like a level of trust and community for sure. So,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
yeah.
I've been really surprised how, connected it feels,
Mm-hmm.
with
Yeah.
I've
Kind
been
of feel
doing
like you're
that.
part of the conversation too, which is really
Yeah.
fun.
Yeah. It's amazing.
That's pretty much,
Yep.
I guess, what brought me into listening to podcasts was that idea as well. You just feel kind of a part of it. And yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So if you were, I guess, on an elevator giving a little 2-minute explanation of your podcast,
The
you want to share
elevator
with us?
pitch.
Yes, the elevator pitch.
I forget about that sometimes. So, I guess I would say, it's a space for, I guess I say it in the beginning, it's, a place for artists, creatives, to spiritually curious, to kind of discover their creative identity and the value of that, and how their faith and art intersect and why that's important. And,
Mm-hmm.
to really nurture that and cultivate that creative identity for other people who are still asking questions about that and have, curiosity, even just about who God is. You know, you don't have to be a believer to listen to it and, understand that you are beautifully and wonderfully made by a creator.
Right. Yeah, totally. And from what I've seen, it seems like you've got a lot of variety of different creatives, different artists on there as guests. So, not only dancers, but a lot of writers and potentially like that kind of, visual artists.
Yeah. Speakers. I even had, and like I said, I hold it really open-handedly, and it's been this thing that when I started it, if it failed, I would have been totally fine with that. And okay, shut it down.
That's probably the best way to to come in.
Yeah, yeah, because I didn't know what I was doing. I had no idea what I was doing when I started, and so it's something God has just like graciously continued to open doors and continued to create momentum and connected me with people all over the world that I just was blowing my mind. And so even every season, I just kind of have some prayer and discernment about. And one season I felt like was a teaching season, and so I had more pastors and theologians and authors on to kind of speak into artists' hearts.
That's really neat.
Kind of the theological side of things. And so, I do some different series and things like that. So.
I think that's super cool. I want to just take a brief moment to pause from the conversation and introduce you to a company that I love that's doing so much good in our world. The Root Collective is a company that makes beautiful shoes and bags with a purpose. After working for a Fortune 500 company, the founder of the Root Collective, Bethany Tran, decided she wanted to make a difference by helping to create jobs for artisans in Guatemala. I own a pair of flats from the Root Collective, and they are by far one of my favorite pairs of shoes. They're great quality and work with so many different outfits. The best part is that every purchase creates jobs for artisans who need them. It's so beautiful that we can make a difference in the world with something that seems so small, like where we shop. To learn more about the story behind the Root Collective and to check out their products, go to creativeimpactpodcast.com/RC. That's creativeimpactpodcast.com/RC, which stands for Root Collective. Let's make a creative impact on this world. Now back to my conversation with Libby. So with the podcast, what has been, just because as a fellow podcaster here, just getting started, what has been one of maybe the challenges that you faced in your podcasting journey so far?
Besides technical hurdles, which always feel like a challenge.
Yeah, it's good. Sometimes it feels like you're up against a wall and you're like, I don't know what to do.
Yeah, and it's always evolving and changing on you,
Right.
I need to upgrade, and how do I do that? And if you change something, then everything needs to upgrade. So that obstacle, without, really thinking of myself as a big techie, that was a big obstacle and challenge. But another one is just sometimes, just that little voice of inadequacy or why are you doing this? Nobody cares. That.
Yeah.
That little voice that I have to, constantly battle that. And because sometimes when you're editing, it's so tedious and you feel like, is this worth all these hours of my time? And then once you get on the other side of that, and I feel like, we don't know what's on the other side of our yes to God. And so I have to constantly keep that in front of me, that this was a yes I said to God. And I have to get through, all those tedious, hard little moments and times. And because once I push publish, God always does this amazing thing, that I never expected. And even in my interviews, I'll hang up with somebody and just have, be blown away by what came out in my conversation with somebody. So
yeah, it's super encouraging to get to connect with people and, hear insight and wisdom and be encouraged ourselves too, which is super neat.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. Any specific highlight you would like to share?
From the podcast?
Yeah, from the podcast or your time podcast.
Oh, man. Well, not a lot of highlights, but, doing a couple of live events, which I did last spring.
Oh, nice.
Those were definitely really fun, and it takes more work and definitely more challenges technically, for good sound and that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
But I did one kind of 2 hours further north of where I live with a friend at her art studio, and so we collaborated. And she just has a little studio, and it's kind of a northern lake town.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, if you do a live event, you don't know if anyone will come.
Right. Yeah. Like, we'll see if anyone shows
You
up.
take,
Yep.
yeah, that's kind of a big risk. And, sold tickets. It was very affordable, but ended up packing out her studio.
Oh,
People just
cool.
kept buying tickets and showing up, and we had some snacks. And that just was so fun to do it in front of a live audience and have,
Mm-hmm.
faces in front of me. And so that's
Yeah.
definitely, I would like to do more of that. And I had some things lined up for this summer, but can't do that right now. So
Right. Yeah. But hopefully soon.
I
Hopefully soon get
know.
to do that again. Yeah. That's such a cool
Yeah.
idea and super neat to get to connect. And it is strange because, we know people are listening. I know y'all are
Hmm.
listening right now, but
Yeah.
but it's
Yeah.
also
Hey,
weird because
everyone.
it's not, yeah, exactly. It's not like right in front of us, so I could see how that would be really encouraging to be able to speak directly to the human beings that are listening
Yeah.
and
Yeah. It was
see
really fun.
reactions.
Yeah. Hmm.
So cool. Thanks for sharing that. It's just fun to hear and,
Yeah.
gain a little wisdom from some who's a few steps ahead of me in the process,
Hmm.
which is really great. So I know
Yeah.
kind of really early on in our conversation, we started talking about your family and the fact that you're a mom, and love to hear more about your experience being an artist and then also becoming a wife and a mom and kind of what that looks like as far as your day to day and how you balance those
Mhm.
things.
Yeah. Well, I feel like every stage of parenting is a little bit different. And so you kind of have to always be adapting and being
Mm-hmm.
willing to adapt. And I took time off, each time with every baby. And I just had to be really okay with that and patient with that. And then especially a third one, I knew a third one would be crazy. And
Yeah.
so I
You're
actually took
outnumbered
almost
then,
2
right?
years. Yeah, I was like, you know what? I don't want to miss this season. And so I think I took almost 2 years off of teaching. I stayed kind of in the realm, but,
Mm-hmm.
as far as my responsibilities and, um, to just be okay with that and give yourself permission to do that if you can. I mean, my husband's job allowed me to do that, but
Right. Yeah.
yeah, to just be patient with the seasons that come your way and change. And every kid has different needs,
Mm-hmm.
and not have too many expectations that are too high that you can't achieve, because that kind of sets you up for feeling like a failure, before you even get
Mm-hmm.
a chance. And
Expectations are tricky sometimes. Yeah.
yeah,
For sure.
yeah, I think God can really surprise you with motherhood and being an artist. And if we don't put too many expectations on it, or even limitations on what God can do with that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Thanks for sharing. So I'm curious to hear, what is your current passion right now? I know it's a funny season and kind of incubating, but
Yeah.
what's been on your heart?
I feel like God has kind of been intersecting all of my multidisciplinary
Mm-hmm.
mediums for a couple of years, and kind of showing me more and more like how they can fit together and work together with music and writing. And I love like short distilled type of writing. I'm not this like lengthy blogger,
Yeah.
type person. And I think that's why I like writing lyrics, because you have to be really efficient with your words and fit them into rhythms and,
That's true. I hadn't thought about that. Yeah.
yeah. And so I really like writing that devotional style, and just kind of shorter distilled truth. And
Mm-hmm.
so kind of merging that with movement and breath and making that accessible to even non-dancers. And I think people are starting to really connect with the body and their soul more than
Mm-hmm.
I've ever seen before. And,
For sure.
people are getting back to like, yeah, I think just embodied prayer and gestures, and recognizing that even in the church a little bit more than usual.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And so that's kind of something that's really incubating for me right now. And I think that's the direction God has continued leading me. Is I love making that kind of language and movement accessible to even non-dancers to really kind of access their faith in a deeper way,
Mm-hmm.
And connect it with their body in prayer.
Yeah.
Can't ignore the fact that we are flesh and that Jesus came in the flesh and the Word was flesh,
Yeah, that's
And
true.
so what does that mean for us as people of faith in our prayer life and as we walk that out? And a lot of people just kind of separate those two, the body and the spirit. And I think that's what's really incubating right now is a little more medium through film, maybe short video devotional style of prayer and more embodied prayer, I think, and that type of thing. So, like I said, it's
really cool.
It's incubating. It's not fully formed.
Right. Yeah, no, that sounds really exciting though, and like a really neat project. And I look forward to seeing maybe the fruit of that in the next little while.
Yeah, I hope so. I'm praying through that. But it's definitely a passion, and I've done some workshops for non-dance audience of just creative identity and using visual imagery and then kind of asking questions like, who am I? And then you find an image that kind of represents that. And then who does God see? How does God see me? Which is kind of the third question. It's a progression. And you find an image, a picture that kind of speaks to you and answering that question. How does God see me? And then at the end of the workshop, have them create a gesture for each image. Just a gesture. You can't say the word dance because people will freak out. But,
right.
Just like a gesture. And it kind of creates a movement sentence is what I call it. And so I've done some workshops like that, and it just like unlocks something in people, and God, can like speak into their identity. Usually people end up in tears and healing, breakthroughs happen. I mean, when you connect that for people, the body, and that relationship with God and how that connects. And so that's kind of a passion of mine that I keep exploring.
For sure. Yeah, that's so cool. And it seems like, there's a lot of probably things that we carry in our bodies that we don't realize all the times, or wounds or trauma, things like that I can see how when we start really connecting that to our spiritual lives, the breakthrough and freedom that can come from that as well. For sure.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. And I feel like when you and I know when you're working with dancers, you kind of already understand that. And that's like common language for us. But, that's not common language and thought for most of other people. And so, to just kind of like create more access to that.
Yeah, for sure. And I remember you mentioned, or maybe it was before we were recording, but you talked about soul care and the idea of soul care. And I would love to hear your description of that and kind of, is this part of what you would describe as soul care as well?
Yeah, that's a good question. Yeah, I think so. I just have always kind of had a heart for that. Just kind of creating spaces and ways that people feel nurtured. And so even with the podcast, I try to do that. And then I've launched a nonprofit about 2 years ago, and it's kind of like a space holder right now. And I've had a few workshops and retreats with it, but kind of in that same vein of for local community and like face-to-face engagement to do more of that soul care. Because, I feel like a lot of artists can feel orphaned by the church. And, I really want to gird up artists and encourage them so that they're ready to respond in a season like we are now in the world. To offer these gifts, because the arts are healing, and, they're kind of a bridge between chaos to order and, make sense of the senseless. And so how can artists do that if they don't feel nurtured and have a safe place to be cared for spiritually? They're always battling this tension of where do I fit in? Do my gifts matter in my faith community? And so I think just, a lot of things that surround that soul-care piece. Almost everything I do, I think kind of is in
That's
that
true. Kind of
vein.
connects into that. Yeah. That's neat.
Yeah.
Do you have any, I guess, tips for people? Because obviously we can't all be in the same location, which would be super nice, but tips you might have for taking care of our souls in a sense. And, what does that look like practically?
Oh, that's a good question too. I mean, I know it looks different for everybody. One thing for me is I'm a runner, and that's always been a really meeting place for me and God, even though it's still hard and it's still
right.
It doesn't make it easier just because it's a place of prayer for me. But, something kind of rhythmic like that, it's, kind of that idea of a labyrinth where, you walk something rhythmic, you don't have to think about it. And then, it kind of opens up more space in your mind and heart to converse with God about things. And, so finding something like that, whatever that might be, that's just kind of your meeting place with God, I think that's a good place to start. It might be journaling, it might be walking, maybe running, or just worshiping in the morning, or, some time of day, but something that just kind of releases you from pressure or,
That's true. It's probably a little different for each person, but finding something kind of rhythmic.
And I think getting back to that embodied, connecting that piece of it, something happens where it just kind of opens up conversation lines with God when we kind of line up our body to be available for that. And so I guess that's a starting point, I would definitely say.
Yeah, for sure. That's super helpful. I think it's nice, especially right now, because we all have maybe a little more room to start a new habit or a new practice every day. And it's a good idea finding what works for each person, or maybe something that we already do or are drawn to, but maybe haven't made a habit of. I always find myself with that, when I actually intentionally take time and just worship, and then I was like, I should do this more.
I know.
Why don't I do this all the time?
Right. Me too. Yeah. And so a lot of us have a lot of less pressures right now, or, get things on our schedule. And so, that's a good time to start a new practice. And I think I heard a lot of people talk about, they thought this time would be so productive, especially the sheltering in place month.
Right.
Where, I'm going to get all this stuff done. But almost everybody talked about this fatigue and it wasn't this super productive time.
Yeah.
It was more kind of just this processing time. And I've just heard about some really cool things coming from that, from some other artists.
Oh, that's neat. Yeah. It's true. I think there's, I don't know, we kind of, like you said, almost put expectations, like we were saying earlier. Sometimes we would put expectations on the time, and then that's not necessarily what God was planning to use it for, and kind of releasing that and being open to, okay, maybe this is just, like you said, incubation and kind of processing through some things and finding new discoveries, I guess. And, it may not be super productive in the way we thought, but I think, preparing our hearts for what's next and kind of.
And, and when you think about beauty and, just how lush and lavish beauty is. And if you look at a garden, and those metaphors are always so amazing with gardening and flowering and producing fruit. The producing fruit season or blooming season is always really short.
That's true. Yeah.
All this time growing and cultivating and watering and waiting. That's the long season. That's, and then the flower blooms and it's 2 weeks and they're gone.
Yeah.
So and I always just think about that. And, why did God make the most beautiful part, the most obvious part we see, such a short season? It seems like such a, waste in a way. And I think that's just a testament to who God is and how valuable beauty is. Even though it's fleeting, it's still so important, to continue to put that into the world and wait for it, be patient for it, continue to sow into it.
Yeah, that's so, so beautiful. And that's actually kind of ties into the last question, which is kind of thinking about what, if we, obviously we're talking to lots of artists, what would be one word of encouragement that you would want to give them right now in this season?
Yeah.
Probably along those lines, who knows? But
yeah, it kind of is actually. Well, there's no shortage, obviously, of things in this world to divide us. And that's more obvious than ever now.
Mm-hmm.
We are definitely seeing, and the arts just can really serve as a mediator and, can make sense out of the senseless, like I said, and bring order out of chaos through stories and songs and poems. And that's what the arts do, is they create language for the conditions of the human soul and the things we're going through, so we can make sense of it and process it. And so it's just really, I think, more important than ever that artists step into those giftings and into those inklings in their heart, and, that their work is more essential now, I think, than ever. I don't think we've ever seen a more desperate time of the world, at least, for our generations. And so, to not give up, but to really continue to cultivate those gifts and sow beauty into, the pasture that God has given you. And kind of comes from Psalm 139 that says, He's hemmed me in, it's before me and behind me. And He's given us all boundaries in a garden to tend. And whatever that looks like, in your life, we're all kind of given a plot of land, so to speak, and where He's placed you. And those boundaries are good boundaries, but to continue to sow into them and not give up on them. And I don't know if you're familiar with Makoto Fujimura's work in his book, Culture Care, which everybody should read.
I'll have to link to it in the show notes.
Yeah, it's an incredible book that's about culture's not a war to be won, but it's a garden to be tended.
Oh, nice.
And he's a renowned visual artist and just a really strong believer. And he's really like a shepherd to artists. But, that to continue to sow, that beauty into whatever your garden is and cultivate those gifts. And, artists, we're kind of the gardeners that can, not give up on, the beauty that we know is to come, the new creation that we know we keep sowing into, and, the new vision, whatever God is placing within you, to have courage to step into that vision and tend that garden.
Yeah.
Because it's generative and it's generational, to
That's
continue
true.
to do that. And so I guess that would be my encouragement.
I love that. And it's really encouraging, especially because we can sometimes feel like, well, we just have this little tiny bit of land with whatever, whatever season we're in, but not to be discouraged by that, but to just really be faithful with whatever we've been given.
That's right, really definitely. And not to despise that. And I know we're in a culture of wanting likes and downloads and fans. And, I think that's so counterintuitive to what we're supposed to be and do and cultivate deep relationships. And I think some of that tending your garden is cultivating deep relationships. And, and so I think that's why I continue to try to do that, even with a medium like a podcast. Doesn't feel like, how do you create deep relationships with that? But I still try to, and God is faithful. I really brought some amazing relationships my way through that. And so, that's where the value is, the eternal value.
For sure. That's so good. So good. So I love to ask all of my guests, what is one of your favorite things right now? And that could be very serious or silly or just fun, whatever.
Yeah, I was thinking about that question. Like, I have a lot of favorite things.
Yeah, you can have more than one if you want.
Well, I think it might be summer and the relaxed pace we're able to have, at least I'm able to have this summer. And I think when my kids were little, I always made sure we had summers like that and just go to the lakes and swim and just enjoy. When they're little, you can kind of do that. And I kind of grieved a little bit missing that as they get older and they're busier and in sports. And, I don't want to run around all summer and miss it. And so this summer it's like that again, and we can just swim and,
That's so true.
enjoy
That's
it.
so cool.
And so I just absolutely love that. It feeds my soul. And so
Yeah. So
that's one
nice.
of my favorite things right now.
That's awesome. Yeah, we were able to, my husband and I just went and spent a few days just out kind of in the country. And it's just nice to get kind of out of the everyday routine and take some time to slow down and connect with nature and stuff too. It's really, really helpful. So so I would love to just let people know where they can find you and where they can connect into the podcast as well. That y'all should all definitely check it out. It's super great art and faith conversations. But I'll let you share the best ways to get connected.
Oh, sure. I really have a kind of a fun community on my Instagram. That's at Art and Faith Podcast. And that's a great way. I have some live interviews on there too that aren't published, on the traditional podcast.
Oh, nice. A little extra content. That's fun.
Yeah. So that's been pretty fun. And a great way to connect. And I'm on Facebook too. You can kind of find me everywhere, but I have a Facebook page too at Art and Faith Podcasts, and you can keep up with me. Yeah.
Sounds great. Well, thank you so much for taking time out of your summer to talk. And it's been really fun getting to know you better. And I know it's really comforting to know that there's other people in the podcasting world and space that are, have a similar heart and vision for artists, and seeing people connected into their giftings and into their faith as well. So I really value your work and really appreciate everything that you're doing. Thank you for just being who you are and continuing to sow into all of us and the next generation as well.
Yeah, definitely. Well, thank you so much for having me, and I bless you on your new launch of episodes and guests too, and love to be partnering with you in this. So,
thank you so much. I loved connecting with Libby. I was personally so encouraged by the thought she shared that we don't know what's on the other side of our yes to God. Be sure to check out the Art and Faith Conversations podcast. You can find links from the show in the full show notes on our website. Are you subscribed to the show? By subscribing to the show on your favorite podcast platform, it will ensure that you have new episodes ready and waiting for you every Tuesday. Whatever app that you're listening on right now, go ahead and hit the subscribe button. Next week, I'm excited to introduce you to Gabriel Spieler. Gabriel is a professional dancer with Bruce Wood Dance in Dallas, Texas, and is a friend of mine from Belhaven. Thank you so much for listening to the Creative Impact Podcast. The music for the show was produced by Michael Cash. Share the show with a friend, check out our Patreon community, and I'll see you next week for my conversation with Gabriel Spieler.